Excellent, thank you. All right, so begin then, Charles.
Yes, perfect. That's perfect.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to what will be a very short session. This is the Employer Association in the contact center sector saying that every time there's a piece of legislation which might hit on what we are and what we're doing in the Employer Association, we want to share it as widely as possible with our constituency so that we're actually able to give meaningful input if there is a case, if there is a need for meaningful input into draft regulations or legislation which is being proposed by government. I am very happy to say that the legislation that we're considering today seems to be pretty circumscribed, pretty insular, and pretty specific. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I cannot see too many gaps which might require directly input back to the Department of Higher Education and Training. However, what I do want to do is I want to break today's discussion up into two sections. The first section talking specifically about the Central Application Services Bill, which has been proposed, and where they're asking for feedback if there's any pertinent or relevant feedback. But the second is really relating to, as a mature sector, relating to what our approach should be and our relationship should be with the public training provider network out there that is in fact covered by this draft service bill in terms of the opportunities for the contact center sector, specifically the private contact center sector. We know for a fact that the public sector that operates either captive or outward bound contact centers will in fact be covered and to a very large extent be bound to the impact of this bill. But the private contact centers, out of the 2,000 odd companies that operate in critical industry, the vast majority of those 2,000 companies are private, not public sector companies. Our question that we want to address is how should we be moving in a relationship or not in a relationship with the public sector provider fraternity and provider network, and importantly, what would we like them to be doing specifically with the private training providers who in fact are actually also members of the Employer Association, but importantly are the training providers that our members are almost completely dependent on at this moment in time. So on the 18th of April, this piece of legislation, this proposed piece of legislation was public. It's called the Central Application Services Bill. And in a nutshell, what it's there to do is essentially to provide for the establishment of a central application service only for the public post-school education sector, to create a central application access point to all public post-school education and training institutions, to provide for the object and function of the central application service, to provide for the manner in which it will be managed and governed, for the regulations of its staff matters and financial affairs, and for what they call connected matters. Now, what's absolutely critical, again, is to distinguish the public from the private and say that this bill does not propose that private training providers need to or have to go through a central application, or the candidates to those private providers need to go through a central applications process. There's no doubt in my mind, however, that down the line, on the basis of this being successful, that the same process might very well be applied to the private training provider network, where in fact it is said to the private training provider network, we want to be able to regulate everybody, not only public providers and which institutions they apply to, which institutions these individuals apply to, but we also want to regulate private training providers. The carrot being that when there is an overflow from the public training provider network, as there regularly is, you can't, at the moment, there are too few places for the number of applicants in our public training provider network, then they will spill over into the private training provider network on an orderly basis, but also presumably on a cost-effective basis. So there's no doubt, I think, in anybody's mind that that's the long-term objective, the long-term gain. Control the flow of potential students into the public and the private training provider space directly through a centralized system that has critical mass and can evaluate applications on the basis, I suppose, of merit, on the basis of geography, on the basis of location. Now, I suppose before I go any further, I'd like to find out from you, the people who are involved in this webinar, about your thoughts on the process. First of all, do you think, starting off with a public training provider fraternity, that this is a good or a bad thing? And then secondly, do you think that if it flows over to the private training provider sector, it will be enabling or constricting? And I'd like to throw it out to you and get your comments, just generally, not even in relation to what's contained in the legislation. Not everybody at once.
Hello, Ivor.
Angela, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask, sorry, Lindsay, I'm going to ask you, bearing in mind you pressed your microphone. What are your thoughts?
Hi there. I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity just to listen in here. Obviously, as a private provider, we are interested in the impact that this could have on us, and we don't see it as a negative thing. Anything that's controlled, we think is good, and hence me sitting in and just listening today, and that's really where we're coming from People Solutions side.
Lindsay, how do you feel about the fact that down the line, if this is successfully implemented, down the line the department could make it a requirement that all registered and accredited training providers, both public and private, would need to use the one system? Do you think that's potentially on the cards, and how do you feel about it?
I do think that it may be on the cards, Ivor, and probably this is why they're going to try it with the public sector first, because if it works there, it will flow into the private sector. And as I said, anything that's regulated, we have no issue with that, and that's how things should be in order to work correctly. But yeah, let's see how it first works with the public sector.
Do you struggle to find candidates at a particular level or caliber to fill your courses?
We are not involved in the recruiting at all, so no, we don't have issues with that. We do assist our clients in looking for candidates, but they have their own recruitment process or the caliber of candidates that they're looking for. Remember, a lot of the call centers, and I'm talking specifically for the ones that we deal with here in KZN, they've got they must have a certain age, they must have a matric, they must have some years experience. So we don't negate or decide where those learners come from. So we're not really involved in that side at all.
Thank you for that. Thanks for that input. Angela, from your point of view, any thoughts?
Hi, Ivor. Yeah, the concern is always around the efficiency of the process. So, I'm pretty happy with the centralized system. However, I'm always concerned about the efficiency around that, and how bottlenecked that process will become, especially when it comes to centralizing something so huge. So I have that concern.
I'm going to have to interrupt Angela for whatever reason. We can't hear you. The line is so bad.
Can you hear me better now? Ivor, can you hear me?
Yes, slightly better. Yeah, please.
Slightly better. Sorry, I'm working from my laptop in a boardroom. I was just highlighting the concern around the efficiency of the process.
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think it's slightly delayed.
Okay, so what did you say?
I am concerned about the efficiency of the process. So when such a huge task goes central, there's always the concern around how is this going to bottleneck and impact us.
I'm going to carry on only because for whatever reason I can't hear Angela coming through. I don't know, Charles, if you can hear her on your side better.
I think the problem is by you, Ivor, because I can hear her perfectly. It seems as if you are a little bit delayed.
I can also hear you.
Ivor, can you hear us?
I see Ivor has left. Just restart the app.
No problem, I'll hang in there.
Thank you. Let's just see.
Charlotte, I'll carry on and then we'll come back to the questions and answers in a little while.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to look at the primary objective of the Act. It's to provide a legislative framework for a fair, efficient, effective, simple, and affordable system to manage, control, and redirect applications for entry into the public institutions in the Republic. And that's defined as all of the public institutions, be they the colleges, be they the universities, and in fact, be they the new, what will become known as associate universities, offering the first couple of years of a degree as well. And the idea is a centralized processing, application, processing, and directing kind of a facility, a mechanism to determine who has applied, what courses they can be mapped and matched to, in which districts, which geographical areas, where apparently the focus is on preventing urbanization where applications come in from rural areas, which is quite interesting. I think it's quite an innovative approach in itself to look to do that and to want to do that. And so in that regard, I think everyone is quite excited. A mechanism which provides equal opportunity for all prospective entrants for entry to public institutions, to ensure that public institutions broadly reflect the demographic of the Republic, to provide for the rendering of services to reach out to rural, underdeveloped, and historically disadvantaged communities, to facilitate participation and integration into the system, and collaboration with public institutions and measures to disseminate relevant applicable information in the interest of the public by whatever means to rural, underdeveloped, and historically disadvantaged communities, to create a single statutory body to manage, control, and redirect applications to public institutions. Now, I think that that's a lot. I mean, that objective is very, very broad, but as far as the functions are concerned, they go even broader than that, in terms of providing prospective entrants with access to information about qualifications offered at the institutions, including minimum entry requirements, career information, educational training opportunities, et cetera, public resources to prospective entrants as well. So, I mean, I think the important thing here is that these are noble intentions. And I certainly don't feel that any of what is contained in the regulations or legislation can be criticized. I don't know from an operational perspective, and based on how we've seen the rollout of other programs by the department, including, I must add, the CETAs, I don't know if, unless there is one obviously integrated system already available, I don't know whether the time frame for implementation on a program like this can be anything other than in the next 5 years. Because there's nothing within the regulations which talks to time frame. It talks to the governance and it talks to how the council gets constituted, but it doesn't in fact talk to the time frame of what is being envisaged. For me, one of the biggest advantages of doing what is being done here is the centralization of information, the ability to conduct meaningful and qualitative research on the impact of the application process, and importantly, to create a mapping mechanism of candidates to positions which are available in the various public institutions. There's a lot of this work that is being done in the United States, and in fact, there are a number of centralized application and admission systems as well, which operate, that have been going for a period of time, between 5 and 10 years, some of them, and are still not fully implemented. So on the face of it, the question has to be, who are the technology partners? What is their experience? And importantly, over what time frame do they believe that they will be able to get the community to use a system like this? On the schooling side, it has been it has been implemented. And here I look specifically to Gauteng and how it's been implemented successfully over a 3-year period in Gauteng, to the extent that now parents are used to the system. The allocation process is quite smooth. And the only thing which is working against the current system is that people don't meet the deadlines and in fact wait until the very end to apply, by when the system has already done the majority of its allocations. But on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be too much in what is being proposed here that should or can be criticized. Again, I would like to hear from you guys as to whether or not, having read what has been sent out to you previously by the Employer Association and the CCMG on behalf of the Employer Association, whether or not you have anything in particular you think is worthwhile to give back to the department in response to the draft that they've published, or in fact whether, like me, you think that on the face of it, it covers all of the bases. Peter, let me start with you, bearing in mind you joined last. Let me start with you and ask what your impression is of these draft proposals. Peter, are you there? Can you hear me? Angela, maybe you want to have another bash?
Hi, Ivers. I'm actually not seeing the rest of the guys on here, but it does say 4 participants. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can definitely.
Wonderful, thank you. So, my concern is around the efficiencies of the process, as it is in most institutions that are government-led. And I'm sorry to say that that has been my experience. So, I know that the process has been implemented in a schooling system. I think that it works from a schooling point of view to some degree, but in the private sector, I'm not too sure it's going to work very well. Purely because I think each institution has its own objectives, intentions, marketing, and how will that now affect a central system, or how will that be affected or impacted by a central system? So for me, I would need more clarity on the private sector. I think from a public point of view, it's just the process. Is the process, are the systems, is the IT in order, and are people able to access that within those communities that they specifically refer to? So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. I think that the issue of people applying to institutions as opposed to registering on the system is going to be a continuing, confusing thing that is going to take a long time for people to get used to. Because quite frankly, I think that in the application process, it is very often the parents that aspire to see their children at particular institutions. And therefore, for example, whether they're in the outlying rural areas or whether they're in the urban areas, if they're in Gauteng, they'll want their kids to either go to Wits or to UJ, irrespective of the opportunities available, the seats available, and irrespective of the admission criteria. And so I think that the system is going to have its time cut out for it, distinguishing criteria between different institutions, because there's absolutely no implication in these regulations about uniform admission criteria beyond the obvious, beyond the first base of standards that all of the institutions ascribe to currently. But the majority of institutions have their own unique criteria that they put on top of the standardized criteria. And for a system to take account of that, I think it's going to need to be a pretty well-built system with a lot of internal structural credibility to be able to do that effectively and meaningfully. And I think that is the test that whoever has built the system is going to be subjected to. Can it withstand the amount of variation that we know is going to be inherent in the application process? Now, compound that, which will be a public sector reality, compound that with an attempt down the line to try and do that within the private sector. I quite agree with you, Angela. The scale and the magnitude of that challenge is daunting, to say the very least. And that, admittedly, is not the stated objective at this moment in time. At this moment in time, it is exclusively a public sector endeavor. And so I think all we can do is say the regulations look all right. Let's wait and see how it rolls out. And let's wait and see whether it's an improvement on all of these kids standing in long, long lines and queues throughout January to get a place at a particular institution. I think the question is if the system looks to farm candidates out on an equitable basis to the institutions that no one knows about and that are remote, whether or not the candidates themselves will want to take up those places or continue to challenge on a manual basis, continue to challenge by standing in line at universities, and whether those universities and colleges will cut off that application process to external applications and completely restrict it to applications coming through the system. Those are the kinds of questions which only time will tell how they're going to be dealt with.
I completely and totally agree. I mean, if you've got some university students who want to go and study in Cape Town, but unfortunately the system allocates them to their region, which could be, I don't know, Bloemfontein, it could be problematic. So I'm just not sure how that's going to work out, and that's why I'm saying the efficiencies of the process are a little concern for me. But yeah, I think I agree with you. It's good to wait it out and see what happens. But my biggest concern is more the private sector than the public. I think public, because it's been already used within the schooling system, I must be honest, I haven't had experience in that process, but I've heard of some, and it's not always best, but at least it works.
Something that's not dealt with in these regulations, but I think is the elephant in the room, is if at some stage there is an intention to link NSFAS, the National Financial Aid Scheme, which basically funds, administers the Fees Must Fall campaign in South Africa, whether at some stage that will be linked in to this centralized application process. In fact, whether the allocation of NSFAS bursaries will take place as a result of centralized application. And if that is the case, that then becomes the carrot and also the stick to force centralization of the application process, and might very well lead to massive student revolt against something like this, because of how delineated those placements will become and those referrals will be. In other words, you've applied, we've matched you to something which is in this province or in this institution. If you take it, it will be free education. If you do not, your place will be given to somebody else, and you will forfeit your free education entitlement from the state. If it becomes as, I don't want to say draconian, because I think that's an orderly approach, but if it becomes as draconian as that, it might result in massive societal upheaval based on how the system currently operates, which is that you can apply anywhere, and wherever you get in, NSFAS will cover you. Now, these regulations are absolutely silent on that leg of the deal and that consequence of implementing a central application process. But it can't be too far around the corner that the integration of NSFAS is on the cards. At least that's my impression. Okay. Guys, we just wanted, as the Employer Association, to touch sides on talking about this draft regulation. I don't think there's anything to give feedback on at this stage, because it certainly is silent on including the private provider network. It is silent on integrating NSFAS. In fact, it's silent on more things than it covers. But at this moment in time, as far as a regulation is concerned, I don't believe there's too much to criticize in this regulation, and therefore I don't necessarily believe that there is space for the Employer Association to do anything other than say to the department, we support what is a systems proposal and await to see how it's going to be practically implemented. However, the second part of today's discussion I think is more pertinent, and that is, if a system like this is an indicator of professionalization in the public provider space, then as contact center clients, as the companies that need their employees trained and their managers trained as they build their workforces, is it not prudent for the Employer Association to approach the Department of Higher Education and Training and say, we want to initiate an engagement with the public training provider network, where we want to encourage them to do business with our grouping of private training providers in such a way that the public providers offer accredited training which is acceptable to the industry and the sector, and in the process are able in a better way to access state resources to subsidize that training, thereby bringing the cost of the training down as far as the employer fraternity itself is concerned. I know this is a red flag to current training providers who have a very loyal relationship with the CCMG and with the Employer Association. But it would be remiss not to ask the question of whether you don't consider it wise for us to at least begin to have that discussion with the public training provider network. Angela, what are your thoughts in this regard? I see Lindsay is no longer online, unfortunately, but what are your thoughts in this regard?
Look, I think it's always a good idea. Collaboration is always going to work in some form, shape, or manner. I think that the conditions of that need to be very specific. But I like the idea, Ivor. I really do like the idea because I think it brings the private providers, into a space of being recognized by the bigger, institutions, and working with them would be fantastic. I also think it would reduce the cost of training, which is fantastic, on all levels. There's just the concern about how is that selection process done, et cetera, which is always a little bit of a concern for me. But I think the idea is fantastic. I really like it.
Charles, from your point of view, is it something you think it's worth taking to the members for a mandate about?
Definitely. I can't understand that we don't have more people in this chat even, because it could have a big impact on the industry, and I like it. I can't understand why we don't have more members already just interested in the topic.
All right, so maybe what we want to do is create an awareness campaign around the call for a mandate from the members to possibly take it back to the department and say we're ready to engage with the public training provider network, but driven, I would imagine, by a grouping of people, a committee, which is well reflective of the concerns of the private training provider network, which is where the loyalties have lain in the industry for so long, in the sector for so long.
Yeah, definitely. We can try and do something like that.
All right, fantastic. Well, guys, thank you very much. And Charles, thank you for organizing it. And let's just keep the thing ticking on this one, because it's not going to go anywhere. And I think that if we grab this opportunity, we might very well find ourselves able to integrate our private training provider network with the public training providers in such a way that we're able to access sufficient funding to bring the cost of training and development down significantly for the sector as a whole. So thank you very much for joining me. And Charles, thank you for organizing it.
Thank you so much. I will send a link to the video afterwards to everyone. It will be on our YouTube channel, and I will get the social media girl to share it on Facebook as well.
Thanks, Charles. Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ivor. Thanks, Charles. Bye.